Welcome. Lately, it seems like there has been nothing but bad news about the military, no matter which side of the fence you're on. Whether it's moral dilemmas or budget cuts, retired Brigadier General Richard Behrenhausen is here to discuss the controversies. Welcome, General.
Thank you, Holly.
Yeah,
happy to be here.
Good. We're glad to have you. You know, there's my favorite thing that I've learned about you is that you were actually part of the original Band of Brothers. Is that true? Again,
well, I was in the Band of Brothers,
right.
Yes, but the original Band of Brothers traces itself to World War II, and I wasn't quite old enough for World War II, but I was in the Band of Brothers, the 1st Battalion, 506th Infantry, 101st Airborne in Vietnam.
Right, and you say that the story as it's portrayed on the series, the television series, is relatively accurate.
Very accurate, very accurate, and faithful to the story and faithful to the players in the story.
Yeah, and the thing, what was unique about this Band of Brothers? How did they become the Band of Brothers to begin with?
Well, like many units in the Second World War, unlike more modern wars, the unit was formed up at a certain location, in this case in the base of Currahee Mountains in Georgia, and they basically stayed together for the whole war. Now, of course, they had casualties and they had replacements come and go, but the core of the unit stayed together, and they fought as a unit for, in some cases, 3 to 4 years.
Yeah. And that created a original kind of a
creates tremendous morale, esprit de corps, efficiency. Particularly combat operation efficiency. They know how to do things. They've done it as a team. Right. It's a great way to go to war.
Yeah, and what was their extraordinary accomplishment for people who don't know the story?
Well, they fought all across the European battlefield. They parachuted in on D-Day, and they fought all the way to the end of the war. They were at Normandy. They parachuted at Normandy. They were at the Battle of the Bulge. They had a very historic background.
So they kind of hit all the major battles, fought them together, and had a unique perspective that nobody else had, for the most part. Yeah, as far as we knew. And why did you go into the military in the first place?
You know, it's that wonderful old Army recruiting slogan, be all you can be. My options coming out of high school were essentially to work in a grocery store or to join the Army. And I thought I elected to join the Army. My guidance counselor, fortunately or unfortunately, wouldn't hear of it and said, you're not joining the Army. If you want to be in the Army, fine, but you're going to go to college first. And the next thing I knew, I had an appointment to West Point.
So you graduated from West Point, and at that point, what direction did you head in the military? Was prescribed for you?
I headed off in what I thought was going to be a fulfill my obligation 3-year tour. And I had no intention of ever being a career military officer. I did want to pay back my obligation for having gone to West Point, obviously. But as I neared the completion of my 3 years, obligatory 3 years, I was stationed in Korea, and I wrote my wife a letter and said, okay, we're getting to the point now where I can leave the Army. We're going to do that in June and maybe go back to college and be a teacher. And I got a letter back and said, no, you may be leaving the Army, but I'm not. I like it.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So Betsy, who's your wife, actually enjoyed the military life.
Very much.
And it was her influence that made you...
Without a doubt.
Yeah. And was there a point where you knew that this was the life for you?
I never knew it was. In fact, as I look back on it now, I wonder at how I did 30 years in the military. I enjoyed it. I loved being with the soldiers. There were parts of the Army that, particularly the bureaucracy of the Army, that drove me wacky most of the time. But we had a good life, and we lived in England, we lived in Germany, we lived in Italy, we lived all over the United States. We moved very, very frequently. My older daughter never repeated a school in 12 years.
That says a lot for her. Yeah, definitely.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, right.
And she in turn married a military man anyway.
Oh,
so, yeah.
Wow, so she didn't have enough of it. Yeah, that's amazing. Well, you became a brigadier general, so obviously you were very successful in military terms anyway, to rise to that level.
Well, let me say I was lucky and fortunate.
Right. Well, what was the most interesting assignment that you had?
Oh, I think, first off, there's nothing like being in combat. But interesting isn't the right word.
Yeah.
Terrifying, sometimes rewarding, sometimes boring, sometimes exhilarating, but there's nothing like that. And I was very proud to be an airborne soldier in combat. But from an all-around tour of enlightenment and enjoyment and family fun, you couldn't beat our tour in Verona, Italy, which was just wonderful.
And what was your assignment there?
Believe it or not, I was the number 3 man in the Italian army.
Oh, wow.
It was a NATO position. It was called Land South. It was a NATO 4-star command. The 4-star commander was an Italian. And we were stationed in Verona, Italy, and we were in charge of all the Italian land forces, which essentially was Land South, with the exception of a reinforcing brigade from Portugal, and of all places, one from North Carolina.
Oh, wow.
And so I was the token American in Land South as the number 3 man in the headquarters.
Yeah, that must have been fascinating.
It was wonderful.
Yeah.
They treated us, well, I am half Italian.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah,
We got to live in my mother's homeland.
Oh, that would be
Yeah,
interesting.
so it was quite good.
Yeah, and then one of your final assignments was with the Department of Defense for drug interdiction. Is that right?
Here.
Yeah.
It was my last assignment. I was the first commanding general of Joint Task Force 6, which was the Border Interdiction Task Force, and that was a idea that came to Colin Powell as he was the commander of Forces Command in Atlanta, Georgia, just before he became the chief of staff. And he felt that the military could help with the border war, with the drug war, by assisting law enforcement along the Mexican border, and that was our mission.
And how does that work?
Well, when it's done well, it works well. It you know, there are laws in our country that prohibit your active duty military, and your reserves for that matter, from apprehending or interdicting people. We don't have any police powers, but we do have technology. We have intelligence gathering capabilities. We have tactical capabilities. If used correctly, when offered to law enforcement agencies, the military can be very useful in the border war.
And that function still exists?
Still exists. It's now called Joint Task Force North. In my day, we covered from San Diego to Brownsville. Now it goes up around the Canadian border as well. Actually, we covered from Los Angeles down to San Diego.
All right, yeah. Now, you knew General Petraeus, is that correct?
No, I do not know General Petraeus. No.
Have you ever worked with him at all?
I know him only by reputation because he was also a 101st soldier.
He was, yeah. And of course, you know the situation where he was, you know, had to resign his command. And what do you think about that? I mean, I know that how does that impact the military? How do you think he
well,
made
you know,
that
let me
error
say
in
right
judgment?
out,
Yeah.
to me it's disgraceful. He was one of our, without question, one of our finest soldiers. He was a West Point graduate. He should have lived by the code of duty, honor, country. He didn't live by that code. He violated his own honor. I think that it has an impact on every soldier who looked up to him, because you expect your leaders to set the standard, and he didn't. I'm very cut and dried on this.
Yeah, and I read recently that there are actually a fairly large percentage of officers who end up having to leave their commands because of this type of an
Well,
issue.
no, that's not true. There are the occasional commanders who are relieved of their command, sometimes for sexual misconduct, but certainly not a large percentage.
Yeah.
I mean, when you look at the number of serving generals, there are 200 in the Army. There are 230 serving generals in the last 10 years, maybe. So in the last 10 years, there's probably been 1,000 serving generals over that time frame. No more than 5 of them have been involved in that kind of misconduct.
So it really isn't as bad
No.
as people would
But
like
it's
to put.
bad. Whenever it happens, it's bad because, again, the leader sets the standard.
Do you think that he was warned, or that he was able to keep it completely secret? Do you think staff would have been aware
I
of
don't
this?
know. I would only have hearsay in that. The hearsay that I have heard is that his staff indeed said, General, you're letting this woman get too close to you. She has too much access to people in our headquarters. You got to shut it down.
And so indeed she apparently did have access to things she shouldn't have had access to because of this. But
Well, it's an interesting case because,
Yeah.
of course, she had a security clearance.
uh-huh.
But there's a time and place when the security clearance is not important. I mean, she was not on active duty at the time. She was a journalist. And so security clearance or not, there were certain things she should not have been exposed to or privileged to.
Right, yeah. And does the Army or military have guidelines about, boundary issues related to the media or journalists and that kind of thing?
Well, I think the military has come to terms with the media since Desert Storm. And I think there's a very good working relationship between the military and the media. I myself have a long history of military media relations. I think they understand. I think they understand what non-attribution means. I think they understand what off the record means. I think journalists are much more welcome than they used to be at military installations and at military affairs. You see that clearly at Fort Bliss, where Dana Petard has opened that post to everyone, particularly the media. We learned our lesson that it's better to get out in front with the media than to try and keep things away from the media. It doesn't work. It never works.
Yeah. And what about the situation that happened where the media had the access to the general staff meeting? For some reason I'm not thinking of the general's name, who also ended up resigning over the scandal a few years ago.
You're talking about the commander in Afghanistan who had the Rolling Stones interview.
Right, yeah.
Well, that's not the media's fault. That's the general and his staff's fault. They were dumb.
So what?
That's General McChrystal,
Oh, that's right, yeah.
who's a wonderful soldier.
Yeah.
But they were just dumb. They knew better than that. They knew better than to talk about the president like that in the presence of media. That's what we try to tell all of our military. Be forthright, be honest, but don't be stupid.
Yeah.
They were stupid.
And so so again, that was an error in judgment.
Absolutely.
That I guess they were sitting around.
Absolutely. And General McChrystal, to his credit, has admitted that.
Yeah.
He's admitted that.
Right.
That it was a terrible error in judgment.
Right, yeah.
And he's an honorable guy, and he did the right thing. But
Yeah.
it was stupid.
Yeah. It really is unfortunate that you have these two men and probably many other people who have illustrious careers, have served their country faithfully, and then this one situation, one error in judgment brings disgrace on them, the military, and their downfall.
Yes, but it's not a problem only endemic to the military.
Oh, that's
it's in
for
every
sure.
aspect of life.
That's true,
It's
yeah.
that old story about climbing up the higher you go up the flagpole, the more
Yeah.
you're exposed.
Right, yeah, and it is difficult though. Do you think that now another thing that's happening recently is the whole issue of women in combat? What do you think about that, where President Obama has recently announced that that's what the goal is? What does that mean?
I think it's much ado about nothing. Women have been in combat. They've been in combat for the last 20 years, in real combat. They've been in the Army since the 40s. The only issue here is, let's be sure we establish the right standards. You have to integrate, whether you're integrating Black Americans, Mexican Americans, homosexual Americans, or women, you have to integrate according to standards and not to quota. Quotas, immigrating to quotas, trying to establish norms by quotas results in lowered standards. That's what you don't want. That's what everyone has to watch out for.
Right.
I have no doubt that there are thousands of women who can meet the standards to be an infantry officer or an armor officer. But you want to be sure that those who become infantry or armor soldiers indeed meet the same standard as their male counterparts, because lives are going to depend on it. eventually. I don't think anyone's, you know, the Army is best at following orders. And when told to do something, they'll do it. But sometimes they overdo it. And they try to get there too fast, and the result are quotas. And I'm against quotas. I'm for standards.
Yeah. And what have been the problems that people have brought up, the detractors have brought up around women being in combat? Why is that a bad idea?
Well, I guess the two most misguided comments are, one, that in a tense situation you will tend to overlook, if you're a male, you will tend to overlook your mission at the expense of helping your comrade if your comrade happens to be a woman. That's nonsense. You do the same thing for your male comrade. If your buddy, whether it's a male or female, is in trouble, you're going to help him. So that one is nonsense to me. The other one may be a little more difficult to come to grips with, and that's the sanitation issue, the health issue. Being an infantryman is dirty business. Dirty business. And you're in a hole. You might be in a foxhole for 24 hours at a time. Now that makes it a little bit more difficult than everyone. How they come to grips with that, I don't know. I do know, I have a cousin who was the first female correspondent with the U.S. Marines who went downrange in the attack in Desert Storm in 1991. Linda Patilla was her name. She was a CNN correspondent. And I said, Linda, how did she do it? And she said, you have to have a big poncho.
Yeah. Well, when you think about this, there are other countries that have women in combat. I mean, Israel is one that comes to mind.
Absolutely. Well, it's just not Israel. There's a lot of the European countries have women. Yes. So
women in combat.
Yeah.
And why would women want to do this anyway? Why not try to avoid being in a foxhole?
Well, no, wait now. That's why do women want to play very well basketball, softball? Because they're competitive. They want adventure. They want excitement. They're patriotic. They want adventure. They want to contribute. They want to serve for the same reason that men do it.
So really the major barriers are the two that you described. There aren't other major barriers that are
I don't even describe them as major barriers. I describe them as obstacles we'll learn to deal with. The first one, coming to the aid of your comrade, that's just combat. That doesn't matter. I don't care who your foxhole buddy is, who your tank crewman is. You're going to help each other. That's the whole nature of bonding. And they're going to bond. The sanitation issue, we'll just have to deal with. But we've dealt with it. We're dealing with it right now in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's just an overblown issue. Everyone learns to deal with it.
So you don't see this as a huge issue, other than just making sure that we don't get quota minded.
Yeah, I don't see it as I don't even see it as an issue, Holly. I see it as a yes sir, we're going to do it, and we need to do it.
Now, what about the whole issue of gays in the military and how that has evolved?
Did you see how smoothly that's evolved? It's the same. It was the same overblown issue. It's done. The only issue remaining is the Defense of Marriage Act, which is the Army or the military, that matter, going to give in and recognize a marriage, and then allow a married homosexual couple, same-sex couple, to live in on-post quarters.
Yeah.
That's the remaining issue.
Yeah. So it doesn't. What were some of the barriers cited for allowing gays to serve openly in the military?
Well, the big one, of course, is unit cohesion. Having a homosexual unit will somehow affect the morale, the esprit, or cause dissension. It's proven to be almost a non-issue.
So it really hasn't affected the morale or the esprit de corps at all.
Well, of course, I haven't served
since
that edict came. In my day, that we had homosexuals in the Army, but for the most part, they did not. They were not ever outed.
So to speak. Yeah. In terms of of the whole issue of military chaplains, and it's my understanding that part of the whole issue from that standpoint is that if you are a chaplain and you're unwilling to perform a same-sex union or marriage, then you cannot serve. Is that?
I don't know
you know?
the answer to that,
Yeah.
Holly. I'm just not.
You're not that
current
up
on that,
onto it.
no.
Because, I guess this gets back to, moral issues of are we, as a result of embracing, some of these philosophies and so forth, also moving toward a totally secularized military, which is hostile to, Christian values. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Oh, I think not. I think that there are significant Christian values within the military. Now, the Army, the military, is simply a mirror of society. American society has changed dramatically in the last 100 years. Now, you or I may not like where some of the values have gone, but the base values of our country have changed dramatically. There's acceptance of things that were unthinkable when I was a child, for example.
Yeah.
But the military is a mirror of society. What you don't want is the military to become its own little homogeneous sect that doesn't reflect American society. That would be bad. Your military, to be your military, must reflect all of the values of the country.
Yeah. If you look at that issue, and traditionally the military has been, has embraced Christian values, provided training based ethics and morality on Christian values. Do you think that's changing or
No,
or not?
you know that old saying? There's no atheist in a foxhole.
So how do you think the values are reflected in the military per se?
Well, I think there's a great emphasis on the Army family, a great emphasis on the Army family. In fact, there is much more concern and support provided to the Army family now than there was in my day in the Army. In many respects,
how is that?
well, in many respects, when I went off to war, my wife and family were told to fend for themselves. They weren't allowed to stay on the military post. They had to go find a place to live. They had to take care of themselves. They still had their ID card, but most of them didn't stay on the Army post. They basically went to their hometown. Today, the Army takes care of the family, whether it's the husband left behind or the wife left behind. There are all sorts of family service support centers on the military. There's great care and attention paid. I mean, from the commanding general and his wife on down, you see involvement in supporting the total Army family.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, that's Christianity at its best.
Right. Well, certainly in action. Yeah. Just one more small issue, and that's the whole issue of sequestration and how that might. First of all, can you explain to our viewers what that is and how that?
Well,
might
that's
affect,
a problem,
yeah.
and that could be a big problem, and that could be a significant morale problem. If they sequester funds and say, for example, well, okay, if you're serving in Afghanistan, but you're not going to be paid for 2 months, and your family's left behind waiting for your paycheck, that's a pretty darn big problem.
So that could potentially happen.
That could potentially happen. If they say, well, we're going to have to cut the Army size, which they're talking about doing, down to take another 100,000 away. That's another 100,000 people without a job.
Right.
Or 100,000 potential jobs lost, whichever way you look at it.
Sure.
That's a problem. You're going to close some Army bases. That's a problem to the local community who depend on the economy from those Army bases.
And that Fort Bliss could be dramatically affected, right?
Well, it's hard to imagine Fort Bliss being dramatically affected because of what's going on here in the last decade, but it could be affected, and it is being affected. I think we already see that. The civilian workforce is down in size. We're getting one less Army brigade at Fort Bliss than we thought we were going to get, so it is being affected. And but if you close your base, like might
That's
happen
huge.
at Fort Gordon, for example,
Right.
in Georgia, that's a tough blow
Yeah.
to the civilian economy.
And when is the D-Day on sequestration now?
Don't really know. I don't know the answer to that. I just know it's a concern for everyone in the chain of command right now.
Right, yeah. And then we're running out of time, but from the standpoint of peace and security around the world, is it also a threat?
Well, yes, it is. And the problem is, it's a twofold problem. As you reduce the size of your military, you also reduce your ability to commit your military to hotspots unless you're willing to keep your force on the go always. In other words, there's no rotation stop. You're always deployed. That will affect morale, that will affect re-enlistment, that will affect enlistment, particularly at this point in time when the economy seems to be getting better and there will be less people, I think, looking to the Army for a job. Mm-hmm. So it's a double-edged sword. Mm-hmm. And if we don't, as long as we want to commit forces and be the international policeman, we need a sizable military. You can't do it with a reduced force.
Do you think?
And you can't do it with a force that's not modernly armed. It's got to have the newest technology.
Which is expensive.
Which is expensive.
Do you think America should and does have a unique role in the world as far as our military goes? I know this is not a fair question at the end.
Well, clearly it has a unique role. It's the standard of democracy for the world.
Yeah.
And the question is, how does it convince other nations in the world to meet its standard?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, again, the old standard question. So thank you so much, General. You have been most enlightening, and I'm sorry, but we're out of time. But thank you for being here and stopping in.
Happy to be here.
Okay. So do you think that the military is heading the right direction and is serving the role that it should be serving these days regarding the world and this nation? Will you or a member of your family be personally affected by any of the issues that we've discussed? I would really like to hear from you, and I can be reached on Facebook, Twitter, or our website. Thank you so much for watching. Let us know what you think.